producer of the show, and tonight our lineup consists of a classic ghost story from Edith Nesbit called The Shadow, read by returning cast member Blake Thompson. I know, we love Blake.
So Pugsley will be coming around occasionally to welcome to the stage, Blake Thompson. You are on. I'm sorry, Blake. All the introduction I can give you. No, but Blake, please. Before you start reading, how did you find this story? I thought it was very interesting that you sent this to me in an email, and I was just wondering where you came up with it. That you thought.
Well, I was looking online, looking for a classic ghost story to read, and since it had a tinge of romance to it.
Yeah.
And, you know, like unrequited love and whatnot. And it was...
Yeah, I know. I'm so terrible. You know, I forgot it's Valentine's Day.
Yes.
Because, of course, I don't have a date. So those things escape me. But, yeah, so happy Valentine's Day. I did want to do a romantic thing, and I should have made a little tie-in with CJ's story as well.
I picked that story.
I know, exactly. I know. I'm sorry. I totally blew it. But... thanks for so see, that's why you should just get up here and do your
Don't trust me to like
Oh, stop, Russell, you're fine, you're fine.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, how's everybody doing this evening? Oh my god, thank you.
The cancer is hurt. Let's give you a little mood here.
Oh, I got mood?
I see.
Well, we can find our way around here. Don't worry, I worked for trapeze for years.
Alright. So, The Shadow. Based on a story by Edith Nesbit, adapted and abridged. This is not an artistically rounded off ghost story, and nothing is explained in it. And there seems to be no reason why any of it should have happened at all. But that is no reason why it should not be told. You must have noticed that all real ghost stories are like these in these respects. No explanation, no logical coherence. Here's the story. There were three of us, plus another girl who had fainted suddenly during the Christmas dance and had been put to bed in the dressing room next to the room that we shared. It had been one of those old-fashioned dances where nearly everybody stays the night. The big country house contained guests on sofas, couches, settees, and even mattresses on the floor. Some of the young men even slept on the great dining room table. We had talked about our dance partners, and then the stillness of the manor house, broken only by the whisper of the wind in the cedar branches, had stirred to dare us to talk about ghosts, in which we all said we did not believe one bit. We thought they were foolish. We had told the story of the phantom coach and the horribly strange bed and the house in Berkeley Square. We none of us believed in ghosts, but my heart leapt to my throat when a tap came on the door. "Who's there?" said the youngest of us, craning a slim neck towards the door. It opened slowly, and I give you my word that the moment of suspense that followed is still reckoned among my life's least confident moments. Almost at once the door opened fully, and Miss Deechwich, my aunt's housekeeper and companion, looked down on us. We all said, "Come in!" But she stood there. She was the most silent woman I had ever known. She stood and looked at us and shivered a little. "I saw your light," she said at last. "And I thought it was late for you to be up." I thought perhaps, her glance towards the door of the dressing room. "No," I said, "she's fast asleep." I would have added a good night, but the youngest of us, new to our company and unfamiliar with Miss Deechwich's demeanor, jumped up and ran to the door and put an arm around Miss Weech's prim neck. Come in, and get warm." She drew Miss Deechwich in and shut the door. "There's lots of cocoa left. We've all been telling ghost stories, only we don't believe in them a bit, and when you get warm, you ought to tell one too." Miss Deechwich, that model of decorum and decently done duties. "Tell a ghost story?" "You're sure I'm not in the way?" Miss Deechwich said, stretching her hands to the blaze. "Not a bit," I said. I hope I said it as warmly as I felt it. Miss Deechwich, I've asked you to come in other times, only I didn't think you'd care for girls' chatter." The smiles she gave us were quite pretty. This is very pleasant, she said, and it seemed to me that I had never before heard her real voice before. We've been telling ghost stories, I said. The worst of it is, we don't believe in ghosts. No one we know has ever seen one. It's always what somebody told somebody else, who told somebody you know, said the youngest, and you can't believe that, can you? And all the most ghost stories are so beautifully rounded off, a murder committed on the spot, or a hidden treasure, or a warning. I think that makes it harder to believe. The most horrid ghost story I ever heard was one that was quite silly. Tell it, said the girl. I can't. It doesn't sound anything to tell. Miss Eachwood should tell one, I think. The only one I ever knew of was hearsay, she said slowly, till just the end. I dare say it would bore you, she ended meekly. We should just love it. Do tell us. I'm certain anything you think ghostly would be beautifully horrid. Miss Eachwood finished her cocoa and reached to set the cup on the mantelpiece. I can't do any harm, she said, half to herself. They don't believe in ghosts. And it wasn't exactly a ghost either. And they're all over 20. They're not babies. There was a hush. The fire crackled. It is hardly worth telling, Miss Eachwood said doubtfully, shading her faded face from the fire with her thin hand. We all said, Go on! Oh, please, go on! Well, she said, 20 years ago and more, I had 2 friends, and I loved them more than anything in the world. And they married each other. She paused, and I knew just in what way she had loved each of them. The youngest said, That was nice for you. Go on. Miss Eachwood patted the youngest girl on the shoulder and said, and I was glad that I had understood, and that the youngest hadn't. She went on. Well, after they were married, I did not see much of them for a year or 2. And then he wrote and asked me to come and stay, because his wife was ill, and I should come cheer her up, and cheer him up as well, for it was a gloomy house, and he himself was growing gloomy too. Well, I went. The address was in Lee, near London. In those days, there were streets and streets of new villa houses growing up around old brick mansions standing in their grounds. He had said the house was gloomy and it was called the Firs. And I imagined my cab going through dark, winding shrubbery and drawing up in front of one of those sedate old square houses. Instead, we drew up in front of a large, smart villa. For shrubbery, there were only a few stunted cypresses in the tiny front garden, but inside it was all warm and welcoming. He met me at the door. Miss Eachwood was gazing into the fire, and I knew she had forgotten us. But the youngest still thought it was, to us, she was telling the story. He met me at the door, she said again, and thanked me for coming, and asked me to forgive the past. What past? Said that high priestess of Inapro, the youngest. Oh, I suppose he meant because they hadn't invited me before or something, said Miss Eachwood worriedly. But it's a very dull story. I find after all, and... Do go on, I said. Then I kicked the youngest. Another silence. The housekeeper's new voice went on. They were very glad to see me, and I was very glad to be there. You girls, now, you have such troops of friends, but these 2 were all I had. All I ever had. Mabel wasn't exactly ill, only weak and excitable. I thought he seemed more ill than she did. She went to bed early, and before she went, she asked me to keep him company. So we sat in 2 armchairs on each side of the fireplace. They were covered in green leather, I remember. There were bronze groups of horses, and a black marble clock on the mantelpiece. All wedding presents. He sat looking into the fire at last. And then I said, What's wrong? Mabel looks as well you could expect. He said, Yes, but I don't know from one day to another that she won't begin to notice something wrong. That's why I wanted you to come. You were always so sensible and strong-minded. And Mabel's like a little bird on a flower. I said, Yes, of course. I thought he must be in debt or in trouble of some sort, so I just waited. Presently, he said, Margaret, this is a very peculiar house. I told him I thought the house was very pretty, only a little too new, he said. Only a little too new. He said, It is new, that's just it. We're the first people who've ever lived in it. If it were an old house, Margaret, I think it was haunted. I asked if he had seen anything. No, not yet. But there's sort of a feeling I can't describe it. I've seen nothing, and I've heard nothing. But I've been so near to seeing and hearing, and something follows me about. Only when I turn around, there's never anything. Only my shadow. And I always feel that I shall see the next thing, the next minute. But I never do. Not quite. It's always just not visible. I thought he'd been working rather hard. I tried to cheer him up. It was just nerves, I said. Then he said he had thought I could help him. And did I think anyone he had wronged could have laid a curse on him? Did I believe in curses? I didn't. And the only person that could have said he had wronged forgave him freely. I knew. If there was anything to forgive, I would forgive. So I told him this too. Then he said I ought to take Mabel away from the house and have a complete change. But he said no. Mabel had everything in order, and he could never manage to get her away just now without explaining everything. And above all, she mustn't guess there's anything wrong, I dare say. I shan't feel quite such a lunatic now you're here. So we said goodnight. But later, whenever I was alone with him, he used to tell me the same thing over and over again. And at first, when I began to notice things, I tried to think that it was his talk that had upset my nerves. The odd thing was that it wasn't only at night, but in broad daylight, and particularly on the staircases and passages. On the staircase, the feeling used to be so awful that I'd have to bite my lips till they bled to keep myself from running upstairs at full speed. Only I knew if I did, I should go mad at the top. There was always something behind me, exactly as he said, something that just you couldn't see, and a sound that one just couldn't hear. There was a long corridor at the top of the house. I've always sometimes thought I saw something. You know how one sees things without looking? But if I turned around, it seemed as if the thing drooped and melted into my shadow. There was a little window at the end of the corridor. That was just far from the stairs. Downstairs there was another corridor, something like it, with a cupboard at one end and the kitchen at the other. One night I went down into the kitchen to heat some milk for Mabel. The servants had gone to bed. As I stood by the fire waiting for the milk to boil, I glanced through the open door and along the passage. Something caught my eye. I could never keep my eyes on what I was doing in that house. The cupboard door was partly open. They used to keep empty boxes and things in it. And as I looked, I knew that now it was not going to be almost anymore. Yet I said, Mabel? Not because I thought it could be Mabel. It was crouching down there, half in and half out of the cupboard. The thing was gray at first, and then it was black. And then when I whispered, Mabel, it seemed to sink down until it laid like a pool of ink on the floor. And then its edges drew in, and it seemed to flow like ink when you tilt up the paper you have just spilt on. And it flowed into the cupboard till it was all gathered into the shadow there. I saw it go quite plainly. The gas was on full in the kitchen. I screamed aloud, but even then, I'm thankful to say, I had enough sense to upset the boiling milk. So that when he came downstairs 3 steps at a time, I had the excuse for my scream of a scalded hand. The explanation satisfied Mabel, but next night, he said, why didn't you tell me? It was the cupboard. All the horror of the house comes out of that. Tell me, have you seen anything yet? Or is it only the nearly seeing and nearly hearing still? I said, you must tell me first. What have you seen? And his eyes wandered as he spoke. He spoke to the shadows by the curtains, and I turned up all 3 gas lights and lit candles on the mantelpiece. Then we looked at each other and said we were both mad. And thank God that Mabel at least was sane, for what he had seen was what I had seen. After that, I hated to be alone with the shadow, because at any moment I might see something that could crouch and sink and lie like a black pool, and then slowly draw itself into the shadow that was nearest. Often the shadow was my own, the thing first at night, next during the day. afterwards there was no hour safe from it. I saw it at dawn, and at noon, in the firelight, and always it crouched and sank, and it was a pool that floated into some shadow and became part of it. And I always saw it with a straining eye, a pricking, an aching. It seemed as though I could only just see it, as if my sight to see it had to be strained to the uttermost. And still the sound was in the house, the sound that I could just not hear. At least one morning early I did hear it. It was close behind me, and it was only a sigh. It was worse than the thing that crept in the shadows. I don't know how I bore it. I couldn't have borne it if it hadn't been so fond of them both. But I knew in my heart that if he had no one to whom he could speak openly, he would go mad, or tell Mabel. His was not a very strong character. He was very sweet, and kind, and gentle, but not strong. He was always so easily led. So I stayed on and bore up, and we were very cheerful and made little jokes and tried to be amusing when Mabel was with us. But when we were alone, we did not try to be amusing. We did not try to joke. And sometimes a day or two would go without our seeing or hearing anything. We should perhaps have fancied that we fancied what we had seen and heard. And just, it wasn't there. Only there was always the feeling there was something about the house that one could just not hear and not see. Sometimes we used to try not to talk about it. But generally, we talked of nothing else at all, and the weeks went by. And Mabel's baby was soon born. The nurse and the doctor said that the mother and child were doing well. He and I sat late in the dining room that night. We had neither of us seen or heard anything for 3 days. Our anxiety about Mabel had lessened. We talked of the future. It seemed then so much brighter than the past. We arranged that. We arranged that moment. So she was fit to be moved. He should take her away to the sea, and I should superintend the moving of their furniture into the new house he had already chosen. He was gayer than I had seen him since his marriage, almost like his old self. When I said goodnight to him, he said a lot of things about my having been a comfort to them both. I hadn't done anything much, of course, modestly, but still, I'm glad he said them. Then I went upstairs, for almost the first time without that feeling of something following me. I listened at Mabel's door. Everything was quiet. I went on towards my own room, and in an instant I felt there was something behind me. I turned. It was crouching there. It sank, and the black fluidness of it seemed to be sucked under the door of Mabel's room. I went back. I opened the door, a listening inch. All was still, and then I heard a sigh close behind me. I opened the door and went in. The nurse and the baby were asleep. Mabel was asleep too. She looked so pretty, like a tired child. The baby was cuddled up into one of her arms with its tiny head against her side. I prayed then that Mabel might never know the terrors that he and I had known, that those little ears might never hear any but pretty sounds, those clear eyes never see any but pretty sights. I did not dare to pray for a long time after that, because my prayer was answered. She never saw, never heard anything more in this world, and now I could do nothing more for him or for her. When they had put her in her coffin, I lighted candles around her and laid the horrible white flowers that people will send near her. And then I saw he had followed me. I took his hand and led him away. At the door, we both turned. It seemed to us that we heard a sigh. He would have sprung to her side in, I don't know, what mad, glad hope, but at that instant we both saw it, between us and the coffin, first gray, then black. It crouched for an instant, then sank and liquefied and was gathered together, drawn till it ran to the nearest shadow, and the nearest shadow was the shadow of Mabel's coffin. I left the next day. His mother came in. She had never liked me. Miss Dietrich paused. I think she had quite forgotten about us. Didn't you see him again? Asked the youngest. Only once. And something black crouched then between him and me. But it was only his second wife crying beside his coffin. It's not a cheerful story, is it? And it doesn't lead anywhere. I never told anyone else. I think it was seeing his daughter that brought it all back. She looked towards the dressing room door. Mabel's baby? Yes. And exactly like that. Mabel, only with his eyes. The youngest had Misty switch his hands and was petting them. There. Suddenly the woman wrenched her hands away, stood at her gaunt height, and her hands clenched, eyes straining. She was looking at something that we couldn't see. And I know what the man in the Bible meant when he said, "The hair of my flesh stood up." What she saw seemed not quite to reach the height of the dressing room door handle. Her eyes followed it down, widening. Mine followed them. All the nerves of them seemed strained to the uttermost, and I almost saw, or did I see? I can't be certain. But we all heard the long drawn, quivering sigh. Into each of us it seemed to be breathed behind us.
A beautiful story. Thank you so much. That was a great thing to choose. That was great. Thank you so much. That was great. I love that. So yes, now we actually have yet another performer. Believe it or not. Oh, you know, I'm so bad at this. Hold on. Before you do that, Phil. Okay. Stay in the background. Where's Pugsley, our host? He's just like late. Oh my God, he's like fucking really doing the job here. Come on, Pugsley. Yes. All right, Pugsley's back. This is Pugsley, the Fiendly Ghost, the host of Ghost Stories Live, and he is going to welcome our next performer. He is a East Village icon in that he's patented. He is going to be doing a show here actually starting when, Phil? March 7th in the back room, and it's going to be called The Rhymes of the Ancient Mariner, because that's who he is, Mr. Phillip Giambri. Thank you.
The Rhymes of the Ancient Mariner will be an open mic for storytellers. Midnight at the Maritime. It's 1962. I'm in the Navy assigned to a nuclear missile submarine operating out of Holyloch, Scotland. When off duty, I'm usually hanging out at the bar in the Crown Hotel in Dunoon. It's a resort town on the banks of Holyloch. Being the first American serviceman stationed in Scotland since World War II, we're treated like royalty by everyone, especially young women. I'm in daily competition with my shipmates for both the attention of the young ladies and for the unofficial title, Town Drunk, for which I seem to have an unnatural aptitude. Well, it's Halloween night, I'm drinking at the Crown, and I'm getting depressed thinking about all the great parties I'm missing in New York. I could have easily altered this uniform and gone out as Popeye over there. Everyone would have loved it. What the hell do they call it here? All Hallows Eve. Must not be a big deal because I don't see anybody in costume trying to celebrate or anything. I get bored. I decide to take the ferry over to Gurrick. It's a sleepy town about an hour across the loch from Dunoon. It's dark when I get there and there's a dense fog hanging over the narrow valley. The first bar I find on the waterfront looks to be right out of the Middle Ages, thatched roof and all. The sign out front bears the remnants of an old sailing ship, and the words above appear to have once been the Maritime, but most of the letters are faded, and all that's clearly readable is Time in Gothic script. That name seems pretty fitting because once you're inside, the place looks like it hasn't been cleaned or redecorated since Victoria was queen. It reminds me of McSorley's old ale house in New York, but grungier if you could imagine that. I belly up to the bar and I order a pint of heavy and a shot of whiskey. The place isn't very crowded and they all look to be locals. Around midnight, I notice a woman at the far end of the bar staring at me. I paste on my most charming smile and try not to look too stupid. She eventually walks over and says, "Hey, Yank, I'm Rosie McNee. Got a cigarette?" She looks to be in her late 20s. Good looking, but she's obviously been around the block a few times. She's very petite and has sharp, penetrating eyes. I offer her a Marlboro, and she stares at it curiously for a moment before taking it, breaking off the filter. She drops the filter on the saw low. She yells over to the barkeep and orders a refill for both of us. When I reach out for my wallet, she pushes my hand away and says, "I'll get it, but it'll cost you another one of those funny-looking smokes, Yank." This time, she asks the bartender for a light, and he offers a stick match. She pops it with her fingernail and lights up. She downs her shot quickly and stares up at me again, smiling. We chat for a bit and I'm getting intoxicated by both the whiskey and by Rosie. She laughs easily and really loud and has the same sick, cynical sense of humor as me. I'm infatuated. We seem to have everything in common. After a few more rounds, we become the too loud attraction at that end of the bar for all the locals, who all seem to know and like Rosie, but have nothing to offer but hard stares for me. I asked if she'd like to go out in town and see if we could find any All Hallows Eve celebration. She declines for what I assume is my Neanderthal behavior, so we stay at the Maritime and get drunker, laughing loudly at the locals, who all seem way too serious for my liking. At some bleary hour, I realized I'd just missed the last ferry back to Dunoon. I asked Rosie, "What am I going to do, darling?" Next thing I know, she's dragging me out of the Maritime. We're running up the hill to the high road, holding hands and laughing. We sneak into the town cemetery where we make love and sleep soundly on a cool marble grave cover. I think I remember a Bobby riding by on a bicycle while Rosie was riding me. He just looked at us as though he thought we were crazy, and he rode on. As the sun comes up, we take a stroll along the low road heading out of town. The heather's glimmering through the morning mist on the side of the mountain. We're happily sipping from my hip flask, and we're feeling real good. We stop at one of those photo booths in the arcade along the promenade, where you put in a shilling and you pull the curtain and you pose for 4 pictures. Well, we finish off the whiskey first, and we take 2 rounds of pictures. We're feeling pretty hot and frisky by then, and we get a couple of pretty intricate poses by the second set, if you know what I'm talking about. Anyhow, while we're waiting for the pictures to come out, we both nod off. When I finally wake up, God knows how much later, I'm half undressed, and Rosie's nowhere to be found. I take the pictures out of the wire rack, and I'm staring at them. The first set of pictures were hugging and kissing and looking real good. By the last picture in the second set, it's looking pretty pornographic here. How the hell did we get in that position in this tiny booth? What the fuck? I start wondering where Rosie is, and I head back down to the waterfront, hoping to find Rosie, but I get confused when I can't seem to find the Maritime. I find a bar that's called the Maritime, but it's a bit more modern, doesn't have a thatched roof. I go in and I ask the barkeep if he can point me to the Maritime. He said, "This is the Maritime." I said, "No, Maritime, not Maritime." He looks at me a bit off and he said, "There's no Maritime in this town anymore. It's been the Maritime since my dad rebuilt it." He points to an old framed photograph on the wall behind the bar. That's my Maritime. What the fuck? Are you a historical researcher or something, Yank? How'd you come to be knowing that name? I stare at the faded photograph, and I know for certain that that's the bar where I was drinking, where I met Rosie. Now I'm totally disoriented. I said, "I was drinking in that bar last night." "Well, you might be a bit daft, lad, because that place burned to the ground some 41 years ago. "What?" "Yeah, for sure, laddie. The owner went off to fight in the Great War. His wife carried on it for a few years until she got news that his ship was sunk off the French coast with all hands lost. The story goes she was inconsolable and grieved until 1919 when she got a delivery package from the postman. It was a Victoria Cross Medal for gallantry, authorized by the king himself for Fergus and his mates. They said she got the medal that day before the big fire. My dad said she set the place afire, walked into the lock, and was never seen again. There's nothing but stone and ash left until my dad rebuilt it in the 20s. Mom wanted to rename it something to bring on a smile and chose Maritime, so as it wouldn't carry the memory of those 2 poor lost souls." "Are you sure it was called the Maritime?" "Maritime? Well, the locals called it McNee's back then for Fergus, the owner, but signs out front said the Maritime. You can see plainly in the photo there." I'm obviously not thinking clearly. Staring at the picture, I ask if he might recall the name of the owner's wife. I believe my dad said it was Rose. Yeah, I'm sure it was Rose. A sad story for sure. Fergus and Rosie were married young. She stood fast by his side until he shipped out to the Navy. I take out a set of the pictures of Rosie and me hugging in the kissing booth and ask the barkeep if he might know the lady in the picture. Now, I know all the folks hereabouts, but can't say as I know her. If I had to guess, though, I'd say she's got the look and eyes of a McCaskey, but I couldn't say for sure since I never met her. I'm feeling really uncomfortable now. I ask, well, tell me, would you happen to know the family name of Rose McNee?" "Well, if memory serves, I'm thinking that would be McCaskey too. Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that. And your lady there, she's got a fair look of a McCaskey for sure." Well, not being much of a religious man and not one to be frequent in the likes of fortune tellers and such, I pocket the pictures and take on enough drink to stop my mind from puzzling anymore. I thank the barkeep for his talk and his time, and I stagger off into the night, still trying to make some sense of it all. I can't. On my next trip ashore, I visit the library at noon and ask the librarian for any book with information on the origin of All Hallows Eve. She searches briefly through some catalog cards and walks me to a rack of books in the back. She carefully hands me a very old book by a Colonel William Valenci on Druid rites and myths and offers, "I think what you'll find what you're looking for here, sir." I start leafing through the pages, and the opening paragraph immediately jumps out at me. All Hallows Eve is the eve of All Hallows Day, November 1st. Tradition remembers that the eve is more important than the day itself. The traditional celebration, focusing on October 31st, is the beginning at sundown. It's a feast of the dead. It was believed the dead could, if they wish, return to the land of the living for this one night, to celebrate with their family, tribe, or clan. I can't read any further. I'm choked with confused emotions. I put the book back on the shelf and I leave the library. I'm disoriented and shocked. Was it whiskey or a nightmare? I was there. It was real. I'm sure of it. I really was there. Well, that was a long time ago. It's a Halloween I'll never forget. I've since given up on the whiskey. And still don't hold much for religion and mystics and such. But I have to confess, every year since then, on All Hallows Eve, Rosie McNee comes to me in dreams, bearing the scent of salt and sea. She asks for a cigarette, tears off the filter, laughs loudly, and we begin another night of drinking and lovemaking on the same cool marble grave cover. It stirs my loins, mists my eyes, and warms this old man's bones. Comes morning, I dig out my old sea chest and gather out those faded old pictures from the photo booth. And soon I'm smiling broadly and feeling young again, just like in those pictures. Thank you.
Welcome to the stage, Phillip. We have to have Pugsley do a little round around you there. Thank you so much. That was great. I love it. Oh my,
I have to be confidential right now. Phillip wanted me to do the Scottish bartender in the thing, and the last time we tried it, I came out sounding like a hillbilly, and then he graciously decided to, and he did a great job. Phil, I actually preferred you to me. Whatever I would have done would have been so much less than that, so that was great. So yes, Phil Giambri, thank you. The Ancient Mariner, his show is premiering here in the back room at Bar 82 on March 7th. And I would just like to reiterate that it is Valentine's Day here at Ghost Stories Live. This is our 9th show. I hope it's not our last show, but these things sometimes happen. We definitely will have a Halloween show, if nothing else, but we'll see. We'll see if all the venues are open. Anyway, the reason I'm saying that is because I need to introduce my last performer, who I love, who's been a great supporter of Ghost Stories Live, Mr. C.J. Henderson. I cannot even begin to tell you the number of books he's written. He's very prolific, but I will inform you that I first became a fan of his with his Jack Hagee traditional private eye hard-boiled novels, and they inspired me. Then there was like a gap. It was a time of Robert B. Parker's Spencer and all that stuff, and it was just a little too jokey, and it wasn't grim enough. I don't know. Anyway, and then Jack Hagee came along, and he was some grim shit going on. Anyway, please, CJ, can you somehow maneuver your way through my maze of tables and chairs in this room? I know, it's crazy. Oh my God, thank you. You're like, actually, I'm glad to see you. Oh man, you know, CJ appeared here once in complete pain, reading a story about pain, I believe. But, oh wait, that maybe happened tonight too, because he's reading a love, horror, bondage story called Whose Turn It Is Now. But please tell me a little, I want you to tell me a little bit about before, because you told me it was a popular story with people.
Tell you a little what?
Well, it's like when you read it, people seem to like it. I was just wondering, where have you read it before? I was just curious. Because it's not a news story, but it's a Valentine's Day story for us.
This story actually, I was given a chance to turn a story in for a collection called Obsessions, and the collection closed in 3 days, and so I had 2 days to think of something and write it and turn it in. And so this is pretty much a stream of consciousness story. Most of mine are. I never use an outline, but this one I didn't even have a chance to rewrite. And it's been reprinted about 10 times, so some people like it. And hopefully, since he passed things out for people to throw, you guys will like it as well. So, there we go. Whose turn is it? Paul stared at the window, watching the snow and the night crowd up against the glass. His fingers dug into the sheet under his palms, tearing to grip the mattress as if firm hold in his hand might give him one on his situation. Sweat slid down the back of his neck, across his forehead, down his sides, freely from any pore with water left to give. Jeez, oh man, he thought to himself, the cords beginning to chafe. How could she do it? How did she even know? I thought for sure there was no way. Paul's mind went back to earlier in the evening. It had been one of their perfect dates, one of the few things New York can be good for, supplying breathtaking backdrops for romance. Paul and Sally had just walked from Times Square, where they'd arranged to meet after work, over to the waterfront, up to Lincoln Center. It had been the nicest evening they had spent together in a long time. None of the usual tension hanging between them. Of course, it wasn't as if they fought all the time. Paul was always quick to point out that he and Sally rarely had shouting matches or guilt bickers. To most of their friends, they were that perfect couple. But none of that explained what had happened in the park. They had eaten at that little Jamaican cafe on Broadway, the one with the bizarrely colored rattan chairs, the one they'd always wanted to stop at but never had. His mind raced through the steps they'd taken after that. Which of them, he tried to remember, suggested the walk in the park? Which one? Was it him or her? Did she suggest Central Park? Did she? Are you all right, dear? Her voice came from the bathroom, a hint of sarcasm in her lilt. Are you comfy? He winced, the terror creeping through his brain, making him nearly frantic. Quietly, for the first time ever, fearing to let her hear him move, he strained against his bonds, making sure he really was tied too tightly to move. Sweetheart, her voice laughed. I can't wait to see your face when you see the surprise I have for you. He shut his eyes involuntarily in a shudder of anticipation. I'll bet you can't guess what it is. Black images of dangerous objects, some blunt, some sharp, all in Sally's hands, swam in his brain. If the wad of silken underwear tied in his mouth wasn't perfectly positioned to strangle all sound, his screams would have shattered the windows. Grasping at his nerve, Paul chased back his fears, trying to somehow get his thoughts ordered. He got himself back to the restaurant and then struggled over their conversation to try and find who had suggested the park. He could see their meals come again, could smell her scampi, taste the pepper in his cream sauce. The wine finished, dessert tray in view, picked over, coffees lingered over, drained, brown rings drying. Bill discreetly slipped between them at the chic Manhattan non-assumptive of... Sorry, I was trying to stop a sneeze and I screwed up. Forgive me. On such a long sentence too, but I'll start over. He could see their meals come again, could smell her scampi, taste the pepper in his cream sauce, the wine finished, dessert tray in view, picked over, coffees lingered over, drained, brown rings drying. Bill discreetly slipped between them in the chic Manhattan non-assumption of recipient, laughing, standing up and walking out the door, down the street, turning the corner. Let's walk through the park. It's not too late. Him! He had said it. Oh, and it's snowing. That would be so nice. And she had agreed. But he had done it. He had said the park, not her. Him. Damn. Maybe you know. She'd steered their route. He remembered now. When they stepped out of the restaurant, she pointed them toward the east, toward the park. It had been her. Oh, God, it had been her. It all started falling into place. Yes, he'd set up the date, but she had picked ending up at Lincoln Center, right across from Central Park. He'd suggested the restaurant, but she had put them in the direction of the park when they left. Then he'd seen the tops of the snowbound trees and maneuvered into his line. Let's walk through the park. It's not too late. She knew she could count on him to walk through the park. She knew he'd say what he did. She knew, oh God, what's she going to do to me just because of 2 stinking dates? Dory had started working at the same firm he did only a month previous. A New Yorker for only 2 weeks. It hadn't taken Paul long to spot her. She was a lot like Sally, physically, same legs, same thick down the back hair, thin, nicely drawn smile, green eyes, but not so clever, so hard, so searching, so smugly in charge. It had been nice, his date with Dory, like with Sally, and back at the beginning, before they had grown used to each other, before the boredom with each other's jokes and ideas and goals had set in, before the games had started. They had just talked for a long time. He hearing about why she had come to the city, she listening to his dreams, plans that sounded big and fresh and reasonable, being reflected back at him by her newness and enthusiasm. And then the sex. Dory had proved no stranger to double occupancy. They had taken a room in a midtown hotel to avoid their respective roommates that cut themselves off from phones and doorbells, television, and the evening mail to be alone with each other in a bed in hours of darkness, new bodies against each other, old tricks and tired habits suddenly as inventive as they had been, as if they were high school kids. Sweat had pasted them together, the freshness of their love dragging heights out of them. Both had forgotten. It had been wonderful. They met again on the weekend, going to a movie, eating Italian back to their place. Their manners were so different that even their second time together seemed exciting. Paul had been transformed, made younger, walking straighter, acting happier about most everything. Even his life with Sally seemed better. He found himself talking to her, feeling good about his little affair and the way it was helping his main relationship. He and Sally had been in a rut for such a long time. They had exhausted each other as things of interest months earlier, maybe a year earlier. Everything between them had become pretty much routine, which is, of course, when the games had come in. It had been his idea at first, stockings, garters, full costumes, and the restraints of hemp and plastic, nylon tape, leather, metal, poles to keep the back straight, to separate legs, cuffs to bind, belts to discomfort, masks to hide faces from each other, to build suspense, terror, anticipation. But Sally had taken to it all, easily, especially since she got her turns too. In fact, it was her inventiveness which had kept them together. Sally had introduced the reality twist, the moments where safety had seemingly gone out the window. She was a good actress, and she loved proving it to Paul. Not that he hadn't caught on to them quickly, enjoying planning them as much as she did. Sally had still never equaled the time he'd let her see the metal rods heating on the stove and then master, told her it was time she was marked as his, and then touched her repeatedly with ice. She truly believed he'd burned her from neck to ankle. But tonight was no act. Things hadn't been set up to terrify him. When they'd gone into the park, found Dory, that had been no act. Dory was dead. Face unmarked, only a few drops of blood reaching that high. The work had been abdominal, gunning strokes laying her open, insides spread in every direction. They had stumbled across her by accident, but it hadn't been one. Going to the top of the rock outcropping Paul loved so much for its view, there they had found her. Eyes frozen in pitiful desperation, birds pulling away bits of her punctured organs, their frozen leakage worming through the new falling snow. The horror of it had sent them stumbling down the rock face, running away through the darkened park. They agreed they did not want to be involved. Who wanted to be hounded by reporters, grilled by police, possibly be the killer's next victim, or, as Paul realized, connected to the corpse as a recent lover. No, let's just get out of here. Forget all about this. Let's go home. Come on. We'll just go home and get comfy, okay? Whose turn is it anyway? Idiot, he thought. Idiot, whose turn is it? Whose turn? What a chump. What an asshole. She'd set him up. She knew whose turn it was. She knew everything. The realization had hit him then. She knew. She knew about Dory. She had to. Coincidences like this just didn't happen. Oh God, please, 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 please. Oh Christ, oh shit, oh man. Paul pulled at his restraints in earnest, praying for the slightest slack to generate hope for escape. How had she gotten Dory to the park? She had to have killed her there. The blood, the freshness. God, she must have done it just before their date. The storm would have kept people out of the park, certainly off the mount. Only desperation doubled Paul's strength. The bed's headboard bouncing off the wall behind, banging with repeated fierceness. He no longer cared if she heard. What did it matter? She was going to kill him anyway. Panic knotted his muscles as he strained. He pulled this way, then that way, harder, harder, all thought gone, erased by fear and the need for release, knowing that just another ounce of pressure, just another few seconds would do it, would free him, would Paul? He froze. The clammy stain of sweat soaking the sheets chilled him. She had heard him. Paul, are you all right? She was coming. This was it. He could feel her moving, feel the air parting around her, knew she was reaching to push the door open. Oh, silly me, you can't talk with your mouth full. He turned his tearing eyes to the pillow. A mouthful of panties keeps you pretty quiet, doesn't it? She entered the bedroom, ready. Keeps all those lies inside where they belong, not running around free, getting you into trouble. Paul braced himself, steeled himself. He had to look, had to see what was coming. He couldn't die and not even see the stroke. I guess you know what comes next, lover. He opened his eyes, blinking at the unending tears, trying to see. He could turn his head for enough toward the mirror to catch sight of Sally moving toward the bed, toward him, of the look in her eye, knife in her hand. Ashamed, he buried his face again. The pain came quickly, nerves letting him know she'd started slicing. He screamed into Sally's underwear until he fainted, which really wasn't very long at all. And then there's one of those marks that indicate it's a passage of time, which you cannot see. Sally poured the second cup of coffee, leaving enough room for the milk to come. Placing it on the table in front of Paul across from her, she said, "Here you go, nice and hot." Paul took the cup without making a response, holding it in both hands as if it were the only warm thing in their apartment. Sally laughed. "Oh, come on, it's daytime. Playland's closed. Stop sulking." She put a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged it away. "What's the matter, dear? Don't like being the scared one for once?" "Scared?" He put the cup down, slopping coffee out on one side. "Scared? I was more than scared. Goddamn, plenty more than scared." Sally grinned widely with satisfaction. "Of who? Little me? Will you stop kidding? Who else do you think I was scared of?" His voice fell into a whisper. You murdered someone. What the hell are we going to do about that, for God's sake?" Sitting down across from Paul, Sally arranged a serious look on her face and told him, "We're going to do what we've always done. Have fun." Going past the questions welling up in her mate, she continued, "All of this was your idea. I'm not saying I didn't see your point and get involved as deeply as you wanted me to, but you started it. So let me ask a few questions. Number one, isn't the point of these little games of ours to scare the hell out of each other? Isn't the idea to push each other to the edge so that the sex that follows is the best we've ever had?" Paul nodded, avoiding her eyes. "Number two, after I untied you, after you saw you weren't cut to shreds, that the blade you felt had just been a credit card, that the running blood just water from the sponge, was or was not that the best sex we ever had?" Yes, but no buts, Paul. We play games or we don't. But you killed someone. You fucked her, I killed her. I could have killed you. Sally put her arms around Paul's neck. He grabbed for her involuntarily, pulling her around the edge of the table and onto his lap. "I didn't, though," she told him. "I just wanted to be yours. So some little slut from Kansas dies, so what? As long as it keeps us together." Paul agreed. He kissed Sally then. wanting her as much as the first time they'd made love, wanting her as much as life. He knew he would never turn her into the police. As they slid to the floor, kicking chairs out of the way, they tore each other's clothing off, attacking each other with a passion they had no idea they still possessed. "We'll always be together," he told her, and he meant it. The police might put her in jail, probably only some mental hospital, but Paul, Paul could do better than that. He could think of much better things than that. After all, it was his turn next.
Thank you, CJ. Here, before you go, we have to have a little pass with Pugsley. Just Thank you so much, CJ. That was beautiful. I love that. CJ, do you want to like plug your website or something? We do have a little airtime here. If you want to like give some on the camera, if you want to just.
Well, hi everybody.
Hi there, TV Land.
CJ Henderson here. If you would like to see what I do, it's just an easy trip to www.cjhenderson.com. There's always free short stories. The store has shipping and handling for 99 cents. Contact the author, make comments about tonight's reading. Please, come on in. And if anybody's going to be in New Jersey this weekend, I'll be at Wicked Fair.
Oh, what's that? What's that? Is it like a witch thing?
It's a Renaissance festival with piercing tattoos, leather clothing, and people being led around on chains.
We should be doing that here in the back room.
Much more than...
Where at in New Jersey?
Yeah, exactly. I want that address.
The Doubletree. Just put Wicked Fair into Google. It'll come up. F-A-I-R-E.
And for any of you people in the audience tonight, CJ is selling books. I am going to buy a copy of Mermaid 13 because I just like the cover.
Well, Stan Lee once said, you know, we don't care if you buy them, just take the staples out, toss them in the air so you can watch the pages float to earth while you go, whee! Just as long as you buy them.
Excellent. Thank you, CJ. Yeah. CJ Henderson. Yes, I just want to thank everybody for coming to Ghost Stories Live. Yes, of course. Go left.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
That's a clearer path. Yes. Thank you again for coming to Ghost. I want to thank all my performers. Blake Thompson, thanks for coming back. Phillip Giambri, thank you. And the amazing CJ Henderson. I'm sorry Andrea James is not here tonight to do our True Ghost Story segment. Unless somebody has a true ghost story they want to jump to the stage with. I think we're going to end the evening a little early because it is Valentine's Day. We want to all be with our loved ones and other. But our next ghost story will be in April sometime. Or if it's not a Ghost Stories live show, it will be a monster truck jam with dirt in the back room. So I'm sorry. I will do another Ghost Stories live for Halloween positively, but this may be a thing for now. I know. But I'm doing other shows. We're doing other shows, and I want everybody involved to be involved in those as well. Thank you again for coming to Ghost Stories Live. I've had a blast. Before I go, I just have to say, people wonder why we call Ghost Stories Live, and this is one of the reasons. I want to thank all the audience for being here. There they are. They're all ghosts. It's amazing. That's what I'm doing it for these people. They want entertainment. They are really badly portrayed in movies and in books as evil entities and stuff. They just want to go out and they want to hear stories about their own people. And sure enough, here they are. Thank you guys for coming. I know you probably had better places to be, but thank you. No, thank you. I've enjoyed it all. Good night. Thank you. Good night.